Have you seen President Biden lately? The lights are on, but no one is home. Every time the president is dragged out of the White House, he looks worse than ever. Cognitively, physically, he's falling apart at the seams in front of the public eye. He's ranting nonsensically about extremists and dangers to democracy, and he apparently believes we have a strong U.S. economy and that there is no inflation. He's clearly delusional. His press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, her full-time job is simply walking back virtually anything the poor doddering old fool says. So it's no surprise that millions of Americans have been wondering, who is really in control of our country? Who's setting the policy and the agenda for the United States? Because if the president isn't in charge, and clearly he's not, and if unelected officials are actually running the country, it begs an important question. Is America even still a democracy? Well, that's the question I'll answer today. Because even though it brings me no joy to say this, when you learn what my investigation has uncovered about who's really in control of the country, I think you're going to be terrified. Not just for the future of our country, but for your own freedom, for our way of life, and for all of your wealth. In my video, I'm going to tell you who's really running the show. I'm going to show you who's really been shaping America's cultural, political, and economic agenda. I'll detail how America's lurch to the far left is part of an ongoing plot to reset the entire U.S. financial system. It's a plan that's been meticulously engineered by two of the world's most powerful men over the last 20 years. These two unelected billionaires exist outside the checks and balances of Washington, D.C., but they wield far more power than any politician or political party. These two men, who you probably have never even heard of, are the real power behind the throne in Washington. They have been pulling the puppet strings through both Republican and Democratic presidencies. But it's what they have planned next that will shock you. It could result in tens of millions of Americans being wiped out financially virtually overnight. This will be more devastating than the dot-com blow-up of 2000, more devastating than the 2008 global financial crisis, and even more devastating than the recent COVID crash. That's not a claim I make lightly, and I'm well aware of the blowback I'll receive for going public with this expose. By publishing this report, I am publicly opposing two of the most powerful men in the world, one of whom has practically every Fortune 500 CEO wrapped around his little finger. The other owns the most influential media empire in the financial world. He controls what Wall Street sees, hears, and reads. Together, these men and their allies are engaged in a plot to disenfranchise you, both politically and financially. The stakes could not be higher. I believe they will do everything in their power to stop me from publishing this report. So don't be surprised if you see smear campaigns launched against me. It's happened before, many times. Baseless government lawsuits, mainstream media outlets calling me racist and homophobic, even a slanderous Netflix documentary. It will be laughable, except these smear campaigns work. That's why it's their de facto weapon of choice. However, their attempts to cancel me won't stop me. They never have, and they never will. Like when I exposed the fraud at the heart of the great financial crisis and warned my readers in April of 2008 that housing and the financial markets were about to collapse. Or when I published my controversial letters from the chairman of General Motors. These were a series of quarterly letters that I wrote as if I were the chairman of General Motors. The letters explained in plain English with clear basic financial data why General Motors was inevitably going bankrupt, years before it did, in fact, go bankrupt. It's what the real chairman of GM, Rick Wagoner, should have been telling investors, but wasn't. Instead, GM's corporate staff published inscrutable reports with all kinds of financial jargon that was just designed to deceive investors. My letters from the chairman told the truth, and they were passed around Wall Street, even landing on Warren Buffett's desk. Or in 2010, long before COVID-19, when I produced a 77-minute documentary called The End of America that has now been viewed 100 million times. In the movie, I detailed how the government's bailouts, money printing, and soaring debt burden would lead to a crisis of America's civil society and completely change our way of life. I predicted in near perfect detail the riots, the lockdowns, food and water shortages, protests, and the rampant inflation we are now experiencing. It brings me no joy to make these predictions. And even though I've been ridiculed and slandered each time I've issued a new report like this one, I feel it's my duty to warn you of what my research has uncovered so that you can take the necessary steps to protect your family and your wealth. Unfortunately, most people won't pay attention. Even fewer will take the steps I recommend. And when the hammer falls, it will be too late. I urge you not to make that mistake, because when you see what's happening right now behind the scenes in the government, the media, and the financial sector, you will realize that you and millions of other Americans are on the brink of being financially wiped out, and not by accident. A powerful group of politically connected progressives is planning to distort America's economy in a new, very disturbing way. I believe and have evidence to prove they want to cancel capitalism and essentially control every single American corporation. In my opinion, their plan risks the destruction of the most important engines of our economic growth. It's all a misguided and delusional attempt to save the planet. And to achieve their goal, they will have to completely reset our entire way of life. The crisis has already begun, and I believe the reset they are engineering is going to cost many Americans trillions in losses. But, of course, for investors who know what is about to happen, there are ways to protect yourself and to even make huge profits. My goal with this expose is not just to warn you about what's coming, but to help you position yourself to profit. In other words, I want you to benefit from this crisis, not be one of its victims. Our financial system, economy, democracy, even the very soul of our nation is being intentionally destroyed by two men. I know that sounds paranoid, even ridiculous, but please, let me explain. As you'll see, these two billionaires from New York City believe they're doing what's necessary to save the country. And like all fanatics, they believe their crusade is justified, despite the devastation it will unleash upon tens of millions of innocent Americans. Simply put, I believe they're on a mission to dismantle and reset the country, the economy, and even the Constitution, and to implement an entirely new progressive power structure that allows them and their cronies to control everything. And while some of this may be hard to accept at first, deep down, you probably already suspect that something strange is going on in our country. Fair warning though, you have no idea how far they have already come and how close they are right now to destroying the American way of life. Lockdowns and government control of your private health choices, that's only the beginning. Soon, entire swaths of our economy will be shut down forever. And there's more than just economic targets at risk. All the terrifying and frankly bizarre trends you see unfolding, like our culture's obsession with transgenderism and structural racism and wealth inequality and climate alarmism, all these things are supported, endorsed, and financed by these two men. It's all part of their plan. They want to burn America down so they can rebuild it from scratch, but in their own utopian vision. And in just a few months, millions of hardworking people, rich and poor alike, may experience the unthinkable. I predict that runaway inflation will crush their savings and standard of living, and a collapsing stock market will shatter their retirement plans, their 401ks, their stock portfolios, crypto holdings, cash, and bonds. It's all on the brink of being wiped out. And that won't be the biggest problem. The real problem will be the shock waves that rip our country even further apart, leading to a shocking surge in violence, protests, and economic disruption. Most people will believe the coming catastrophes are all accidents. The media will claim it was unavoidable, a turn of fate. They'll say that no one could have predicted what happened, that no one could have known how much danger America was in, or how everything could have changed so fast. But you'll know better. The proof is right here. Verify all my sources for yourself. They're listed below this video. Despite this, you can be sure that the media will soon be attacking my character and anyone else who endorses this report. I really don't care. I feel like it's my duty to shine a light on the dire situation that we face as Americans. Because I care way more about the future of my kids and my grandkids than I do about politicians and their lackeys. I'm doing this for people like you, people who remember what America once was and who know what it could be again if all of this madness and insanity would just stop. Today, I'll show you what I'm personally doing to protect and grow my wealth during the dark days ahead, and why this plan to destroy America has opened the doors to potentially one of the greatest opportunities I've ever found in my 25-year career. What you choose to do with this information is, of course, your choice. I only hope that you'll do what's right for you and your loved ones. My name, by the way, is Porter Stansberry. You may not know me, but almost 25 years ago, I started a financial research firm with $36,000, a borrowed laptop, and a cheap kitchen table. That firm grew to millions of members in 170 countries, with some of the world's most successful investors subscribing to Stansberry Research. I was fortunate enough to meet and work with some great legendary investors like Jim Rogers, T. Boone Pickens, Bill Bonner, Ron Paul, Steve Eisman, Steve Forbes, Jim Grant, and countless other legends. My firm became famous for exposing many of the financial industry's darkest secrets, dirty laundry the mainstream media wouldn't dare to air. You see, I built the business with private paying subscribers so we would never be beholden to politicians, corporations, or the mainstream media. We never accepted advertising, we never managed anyone's money, and we never accepted outside investors. We remained 100% independent. This is how, while other media outlets pretended everything was sunshine and rainbows, we were able to warn our subscribers of the great financial crisis, the collapse of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the demise of General Electric, the bankruptcy of General Motors, and the death of General Growth Properties. We showed our readers not just how to avoid being wiped out by these financial catastrophes, but also how to profit from them. It's also how we were able to predict the end of many of Wall Street's most cherished companies, helping our subscribers get out before they crashed. But after 25 years steering the world's most successful independent financial research firm, I decided to retire. I wanted and felt like I'd earned some time to focus on my family. So in July of 2021, I arranged to sell my firm in a $3 billion IPO. Since then, I've gone out of my way to mind my own business. I retired to an old corn farm to raise my sons, catching up on the time I missed with them while running Stansberry Research. And when I'm not with my kids, I'm doing, frankly, whatever the hell I want to do. I enjoy hunting, golfing, marlin fishing, and I traveled all over the world in my own plane. All that recently came to a screeching halt, however. You see, while the COVID panic and the lockdowns didn't surprise me, I'd been expecting that debacle for almost a decade, and I've grown used to watching the government do things most Americans thought would never happen in our country. On the other hand, when I learned what these two men, these two private citizens, were plotting to do, I knew I had to go back to work. I've long been associated with leading libertarian thinkers, writers, and investors. Over 30 years, I've built close friendships with many of the world's greatest free market thinkers and idea leaders. Everyone from the legendary Austrian school economist Kurt Rischenbacher, to presidential candidates Harry Browne and Ron Paul, to writers and publishers like P.J. O'Rourke and Bill Bonner, to many of the world's most powerful investors whose privacy I've always respected. But many of my mentors have retired or, sadly, have passed on. There was no one opposing these two men directly with well-researched reports and warnings. There was no one out there doing everything possible to protect the free markets, to protect private property, to protect capitalism, to do something, to at least try to save our way of life, to protect what it means to be an American, at least what it means to me to be an American. And I know that sounds alarmist, but trust me, at first, not even I could believe what I found when I really started digging. Blatant political corruption at every level of our government, even in federal prosecutors' offices. Mainstream media campaigns to plant disinformation on a global scale, and an accumulation of socialist power unseen before ever in American history. What I discovered was a plan to change everything about the way our country works, to completely reset our financial system and our way of life. Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, Whether you have $500 in the bank or $5 million, this will impact you directly. Yet no one else is sounding the alarm. And that, my friend, is why I decided to abruptly end my retirement. I feel it's my moral obligation to warn you about what's going to happen. So without any further delay, let me explain in the simplest terms what's going on and what it means for you and your family. I'm sure I don't need to tell you, America has changed. The growing dominance of progressive political ideology is a cancer eating away at the soul of our country. But what will shock you is that this relentless drive to the far left has been crafted by two of the world's richest men. Now, I realize that sounds pretty strange. How could two men change our country so much? Well, one of them is the world's largest investor. He manages over $10 trillion worth of assets. That's an amount of capital equal to roughly half of the U.S. GDP. No single individual has ever controlled so much of our nation's wealth ever before. That effectively makes him the boss of hundreds of the most important CEOs in the country, and it allows him to dictate corporate policies across the Fortune 500. There's arguably no more powerful person in the United States, not even the president. There's also no person more responsible for pushing radically liberal political views on America's corporations. The other man is one of his closest colleagues and owns the largest private financial media business in the world. His newsroom controls what the world's business and media leaders read every day. It's his company that frames the narratives that are driving forces in our economy today. Together, these two men control, to a shocking degree, what most other Americans see, hear, and invest in. It's their vision that's shaping our national agenda. And for almost 20 years, they've been forcing their radical beliefs onto the public. What they want to do in America is terrifying. To put it bluntly, they hate the free market. They believe that capitalism is evil and needs to be eradicated. They want to replace it with a new, progressive, and, quote, fairer economic system. They call it stakeholder capitalism. It combines radical environmentalism with fascist forms of income redistribution. It proposes radical wealth redistribution to combat income disparities and to ensure racial equity. It demands that private companies use their resources to help achieve progressive political goals. And their combined efforts are poisoning America from within. Take a look at the success of their agenda already. 54% of young adults now hold a negative view of free market capitalism. Even worse, a stunning 38% of all Americans view socialism positively. 6 in 10 Americans now believe our country is inherently racist, with many supporting reparations. Almost 40% of the country believes, and I quote, "Wealth should be taken from the rich and given to the poor." And these trends are only accelerating. What's more, fewer and fewer people believe in the things that made America great. Most Americans no longer believe private industry is more effective than the government, with over half of the nation wanting more intervention from Washington, D.C. And a shocking number of people no longer believe in freedom of speech, of biological gender, or the right to bear arms. Most troubling of all, they've been convinced to embrace tyrannical and authoritarian solutions for anyone who opposes their radical ideas. All these changes have serious cultural impacts, but that's not even the worst part. They are changing our financial markets permanently, and in ways that I believe will have profoundly negative impacts on our economy, your personal wealth, and the future of our country. That's why it's absolutely critical that you understand what undergirds these outrageous lies. The lie that capitalism has failed. The lie that America is evil. The lie that freedom doesn't work. I believe it's the only way to grow your wealth in the months and years ahead, because as you're about to see, the financial landscape has changed forever. You have probably never heard of Larry Fink, but he is, arguably by far, the most powerful man in America. He has the power to decide, quite literally, which companies will thrive and which will die. How? Fink is the CEO of the largest asset management company in the world, BlackRock. BlackRock's ETFs and mutual funds hold over $10 trillion in assets. It is the biggest, richest, and most powerful firm in all of capitalism. To put this number in context, there are many who worry about the control people like George Soros exert on our democracy, our corporations, and our politicians. But Soros' fund only manages $28 billion. That's less than 3% of BlackRock's holdings. And Larry Fink pulls the puppet strings of the market far more than anyone else. Since 2012, he has been writing to the CEOs of every public company he controls to demand that they abandon shareholder capitalism and instead embrace stakeholder capitalism. This is the belief that companies shouldn't be accountable only to their shareholders, but also to the environment, a progressive social agenda, and a new form of corporate governance. This so-called ESG movement takes power away from the real owners of a corporation and hands the reins to various consultants and political interests. Stakeholder capitalism, in short, is socialism. It's simply a new way for the elites to take control of every public company in America. And Larry Fink will be instrumental in this economic coup d'etat. He has co-opted a huge portion of America's retirement savings and is using it to push for a new socialist agenda in America. And virtually no one has connected the dots on what he's doing. But he is the puppet master behind almost all of the seemingly bizarre corporate decisions you've seen recently in the news. ExxonMobil announcing it aims to transition away from fossil fuels and giving 25% of its board seats to radical environmentalists. Gillette launching an advertising campaign to fight, quote, toxic masculinity, or NASDAQ Inc. pushing a plan to force companies to set minimum targets of at least 2 diverse board members. Perhaps the most illustrative example of Fink's sway over corporate America is the recent debacle at Disney. On March 28, 2022, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a law prohibiting teaching about homosexuality before the 3rd grade. Now, I don't care about anybody's sexual preference, but most reasonable people would agree, I think, that sex education isn't appropriate material for 1st graders and kindergartners. Gay activists and a handful of Disney's employees, however, vehemently oppose the Don't Say Gay law with various forms of lobbying and public relations. And incredibly, Disney sided with this tiny minority of radicals who want to sexually indoctrinate very young children. Tell me, why would a company that primarily serves children oppose a law that is clearly designed to protect kids from inappropriate sexual content at school? Why would they risk alienating their core audience, the parents of young children? Normally, Disney wouldn't do this, but Larry Fink's firm, BlackRock, owns more than 6% of the stock, making it the 2nd largest shareholder. And Fink's letter to his CEOs this year specifically talked about the importance of treating employees as stakeholders, whether they own shares or not. Furthermore, Larry explicitly threatened CEOs that don't adhere to his radical ESG philosophy, warning them in a recent letter. Companies not adjusting to this new reality and responding to their workers do so at their own peril. Yet, despite the backlash, the obvious economic ramifications, and angry letters from shareholders and parents, Disney bowed to Fink's wishes. Unsurprisingly, Disney stock has been crushed, with shares plunging as low as $94. That's a drop of over 50% from their recent highs. Now, for any regular American holding Disney stock, this is a catastrophic loss with real-world financial consequences. For the ESG zealots, however, it's a win. You see, in stakeholder capitalism, the share price is not as important as the adherence to the correct political ideology. It's anti-capitalistic it's anti-American, it's insane. And it's coming to thousands of companies, many of which will see similar cataclysmic crashes in their share price. However, this is what the crusaders of ESG and woke capitalism want. And they're not stopping with individual companies. They're targeting capitalism itself. How are they targeting capitalism itself? By canceling not just individuals, but any company that doesn't embrace their progressive political goals. As you may know, America's credit rating agencies play a critical role in determining which firms can get access to credit and at what price. They assign ratings to every bond that's sold in the United States. The bond market is way, way bigger than the stock market. It's where companies go to borrow money to finance their operations and expansion. Without access to the bond market, it's virtually impossible for any large company to grow or to even stay in business. That's why what happens in the bond market is far more important to capitalism than just about anybody realizes. Without the bond market, the whole economy dies. That's why the credit rating agencies are so powerful. They essentially control access to the capital markets. Credit ratings largely determine whether and under what terms a company, a state, or a municipality can borrow money in the United States. And the three leading credit rating agencies have all recently added a new kind of rating to their credit reviews. It's an ESG rating. That means that virtually every corporation in the world will have to toe the line and support progressive views about the environment, social progress, and woke governance. That means in the US, companies can be canceled if they don't support teaching homosexuality to kindergartners, or if they don't support allowing their employees to designate their own genders and use whatever bathroom they want. It also means that companies that make products or serve markets that are currently out of political fashion can be canceled too. Gun and ammunition manufacturers, for example, or perhaps most importantly, companies that produce hydrocarbons. There's no escaping the truth. An ESG-dominated capital market is the end of freedom in the United States. It assigns ownership rights to people who aren't owners. It makes corporate boards accountable to political masters instead of their legitimate shareholders. And in doing so, it removes the rights of actual shareholders. Most worryingly, though, all of this is just one of the ways these two men are systematically destroying America and ushering in their utopian socialist dream. Michael Bloomberg is, like Larry Fink, one of the most powerful men in the world. And like Larry, he is on a mission to destroy America's free market system so it can be rebuilt to his far-left fantasy. Except while Larry Fink works to manipulate C-suite executives and corporate boards, Michael Bloomberg is manipulating you, the general public. And while you obviously know Michael Bloomberg's name, you probably don't know just how powerful he personally is, or just how radical. He owns 88% of Bloomberg LP, which is a huge financial media company with 176 offices around the world. Bloomberg's terminals, which cost $22,500 per user per year, sit on virtually every desk on Wall Street and connect all of the world's financial markets. For many years, Bloomberg's media company has been the world's insider media company. It's what senior corporate executives watch and where most of corporate America gets its news. But about 10 years ago, as Bloomberg's New York mayoral term was ending and his presidential ambitions were gaining traction, his media business expanded massively into mainstream news. Under a new CEO, Dan Doctorhoff, Bloomberg LP hired 2,300 journalists and placed them in 72 countries around the world. Doctorhoff also bought Businessweek, which had gone bankrupt because of declining interest in magazines. Why would Bloomberg invest so heavily in a news operation when the news business was failing? Why would he buy a failed magazine? Even a decade after Bloomberg News was created, Bloomberg LP received most of its revenue from its expensive terminals. From a financial perspective, Bloomberg News doesn't make any sense unless you understand what its real purpose is. As Dr. Hoff told the American Journalism Review, his goal was to build the most influential news organization in the world. And how has he used that power? In my opinion, more than any other human being in the world, Michael Bloomberg is responsible for the ridiculous notion that the climate is on the verge of disaster and that we must stop fossil fuel use completely in order to save mankind. Now, to be clear, I am not denying climate change, but I am denying climate alarmism and prophecies that the world will end in 12 years. Now, how Bloomberg has propagated this myth is brilliantly evil. He did it by corrupting the underlying science of climate change. In 2013, he partnered with two other radical environmentalists, Hank Paulson, the former Treasury Secretary and head of Goldman Sachs, and Tom Steyer, the hedge fund billionaire and failed presidential candidate. They put together a $100 million fund to create a political and special interest campaign called Risky Business. The goal? To make the climate threat feel real, immediate, and potentially devastating to the business world. In order to achieve this, Risky Business has manipulated the underlying scientific data beyond all recognition. The reports Risky Business began publishing in 2014 conflated and compared entirely different models to create the impression that the most catastrophic potential outcome, called RCP 8.5 in scientific journals, was inevitable without reducing carbon emissions to zero. As Roger Pilk, a professor at the University of Colorado who specializes in the connection between science and government, has detailed, dodgy science published by climate advocacy groups is certainly not uncommon, and it is usually not that interesting. But the genius of the Risky Business project was that it did not stop with a flashy report aimed at the daily news cycle. It undertook a far more sophisticated campaign focused on introducing its methods into the mainstream scientific literature, where they could take on a life of their own. Despite being based on dodgy science, the work funded by Bloomberg and Risky Business was the basis for 11 talks at the American Geophysical Union meeting. This is the largest annual gathering of climate researchers, and after the talks, these claims were published in the major scientific journal Science. That research was then cited 294 times in academic studies, according to Google Scholar. In other words, almost all of the mainstream ideas about climate change and the imminent dangers it poses can be linked directly to Michael Bloomberg. However, spreading propaganda into the official record was only the beginning. More recently, Michael Bloomberg has commandeered the legal system to attack fossil fuel companies directly. In 2017, Bloomberg Philanthropies funded a center for environmental litigation called the State Energy and Environmental Impact Center. According to the Competitive Enterprise Institute, this entity provides prosecutors to the Attorney General's office for pro bono work, suing energy companies for global warming. Their dream is to create a tobacco-like industry settlement that will provide billions of dollars to politicians, giving them still more power in our economy. As the Competitive Enterprise Institute wrote, the extension of this billion-dollar per year climate industry to privately fund AG investigations sets a dangerous precedent. It represents private interests commandeering the state's police powers to target opponents of their policy agenda and to hijack the justice system as a way to overturn the democratic process's rejection of a political agenda. And Bloomberg's plan is working. Not only do many Americans believe that climate change is an existential threat, but he's succeeded in closing more than 60% of all U.S. coal plants since 2011 and more than half of all European plants since 2016. Of course, elites like Bloomberg and Fink never pause to consider that carbon-based power has lifted billions from poverty over the last 50 years. or that fossil fuels still provide more than 80% of the world's energy supply. According to Ronald Stein, the Pulitzer Prize-nominated author, trying to live without fossil fuels could result in billions, not millions, of fatalities from diseases, malnutrition, and weather-related deaths. No, to Bloomberg and his ilk, the deadline to stop using fossil fuels was yesterday, and the consequences be damned. And in the same way, the credit rating agencies are attempting to limit companies' access to capital unless they support stakeholder capitalism. These combined decade-long efforts from Larry Fink and Mike Bloomberg have already had severe economic and financial consequences. Inflation is crushing real consumer incomes, compounded by higher borrowing costs, pushing more and more Americans out of the middle class. Since 2002, the share of wealth held by the middle class has dropped from 36% to 28%, while the top 1% of Americans have amassed more than ever. And this alarming trend shows no signs of slowing. Just take a look at the collapse in real wages, which are plunging at the fastest rate in 40 years. It's a disaster. But my research proves far worse is coming. And it's critical for you to understand that these ESG warriors are not going to stop until they achieve their goal. They are going to continue to corrupt our culture, our legal system, our financial system, and even capitalism itself, all because they fear that a world they do not control from the top down will spiral into a catastrophe. And that, my friend, is the scariest part. You see, these two men, they're not evil, no. They fundamentally believe what they're doing is for the greater good, and they believe that the ends justify the means. They will stop at nothing to achieve their socialist dream of stakeholder capitalism and ESG economics. Your 401k, stock holdings, cash, and other assets, they're of no importance to these coastal elites. And if they get crushed, well, you can console yourself in the knowledge that it was all for the greater good and the achievement of their vision. Or, if you're like me, you can fight back. Much of what I've told you today may seem dark. It may seem like there is no way to protect your wealth from the wholesale economic and financial reset planned by Bloomberg and Fink. However, as I'll share with you in just a moment, there is a flaw in their plan to destroy America, and it's a flaw you can exploit. So that means whether you are enriched or impoverished by this coming reset depends on what you do today. For those who choose to bury their head in the sand, everything they've worked so hard to build is on the verge of being wiped out. However, for those who read the writing on the wall and are bold enough to act early and decisively, they have the opportunity to not only safeguard their wealth, but potentially grow it tenfold or more in the years ahead. Because the upheaval triggered by this attempted takeover of America has opened the doors to the opportunity of a lifetime. I expect the potential returns for those who act now will be greater than anything I've recommended before. And that's saying something, considering I was among the first to recommend Amazon.com back in 1997 when it was just an online bookstore and trading at $1.50. Or Microsoft in 2006 when it was just $26 a share. Or Shopify, Nvidia, Illumina, Apple, Regeneron, and many other incredible businesses. I was also among the first analysts anywhere to predict that the rise of new telecommunication technologies would create a new internet economy, and that the panic around peak oil was simply a lie. However, I believe this story is bigger and far more important than all the stories that I've written before. As I mentioned earlier, it's so critical, it has almost single-handedly dragged me out of retirement. See, this crusade of Larry Fink and Mike Bloomberg and their mission to destroy America and usher in a new economic system that they control, it has a flaw. And that's the fact that their manipulation of the markets has real-world consequences for regular people. Case in point, inflation is out of control. For almost a year now, it's been hovering around 8%. That's 4 times higher than the Fed's official goal of 2%. a number the Federal Reserve now admits won't be achieved again until at least 2025. Food costs are up 11% from last year, with staples like bread increasing 16%, chicken up by 16%, and milk jumping 17%. What's more, no matter how the Biden administration tries to spin it, many sectors of the U.S. economy are already in a recession. As Gary Friedman, the CEO of Restoration Hardware, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, puts it, anybody who thinks we're not in a recession is crazy. The housing market is in a recession and it's just getting started. So it's probably going to be a difficult 12 to 18 months in our industry. You can see the real impact this is having on people in the latest report from Goldman Sachs' credit card portfolio. They noted borrowers were falling behind on their payments and defaulting at rates well above subprime lenders. Deutsche Bank credit strategists likewise predict non-investment grade bonds will see average default rates over 10% in 2024 and will include default rates above 40% for the lowest ranked bonds. Given that the U.S. economy relies on consumer spending, the weak consumer will soon start hitting corporate profits. This will eventually lead to layoffs, creating further weakness in consumer incomes, driving a self-reinforcing recessionary cycle. The bottom line, the shockwaves from Larry Fink and Michael Bloomberg's meddling in our economy are starting to hit regular Americans. The early signs of economic distress we are seeing now will soon snowball into a full-blown multi-year recession. And while the wealthy elites aren't impacted by this, millions of hard-working Americans are forced to deal with the impact of stakeholder capitalism. They see it firsthand in the skyrocketing cost of living, the increasing cost of debt, the weak job market, declining real wages. They feel the pain of having to decide whether to fill up the car or pay for groceries, or whether they can afford to buy their kids new clothes. They worry about how they'll survive in old age when their portfolio has fallen through the floor. And yet, CEOs continue to put ESG ideology before profit. As millions more people descend into financial insecurity, even poverty, there will be rebellion against this woke capitalism. And one of the first areas you will see this rebellion take place is the energy sector. You see, every single industry depends on the energy sector. Travel, transportation, healthcare, education, manufacturing, medicine, engineering, agriculture, construction. None of these industries function without energy. As Credit Suisse explains, without energy, everything comes crashing to a halt. That's why it's been called the single most important driver for the overall economy, and why globally it's a multi-trillion-dollar sector. For tens of thousands of years, it has fueled civilization, from primitive campfires and medieval water mills to steam engines and coal-burning factories. There has never been and will never be a time when humanity doesn't need energy. And as our economy grows, we need more and more energy than ever. And right now, as a direct result of the ESG and stakeholder capitalism crusade from Larry Fink and Mike Bloomberg, energy costs and demands are spiraling out of control all around the world. In Europe, shortages of electricity and natural gas have forced shutdowns of everything ranging from steel to plastics to chemical manufacturing. But the bigger problem is going to be food. More than 70% of European ammonia production, the critical ingredient in nitrogen fertilizer, is now offline. At the start of last year, farmers in Western Europe could buy ammonia for about $250 per ton. Today, the same ton of fertilizer costs $1,250. If European gas supplies remain disrupted and these sky-high fertilizer prices persist, the International Fertilizer Association estimates a 2% drop in global corn, wheat, rice, and soybean production. And while 2% may not sound like much, the ripple effects of these shortages will have far-reaching, devastating consequences. As Robert Bryce, author of A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations, writes, this appears to be only the latest development in what will likely be a sustained period of higher food prices, food insecurity, and even famine for tens of millions of people around the world. And these problems won't be constrained to Europe. They're coming to America too. It's only a matter of time. Put simply, you must prepare for a global shock in food prices to go along with crippling costs for energy, heat, and utility bills. And while the Ivy League elites lecture us that wind, solar, and other renewables are the only answer and the only way forward, the cold, hard fact is that there is zero chance of renewables ever producing enough low-cost energy to fuel the world. As the Manhattan Institute reported, thinking that wind and solar can ever replace fossil fuels is nothing but an exercise in magical thinking. Even the former CEO of the Clean Energy Council, an organization devoted to renewable energy, has had to come face to face with reality, admitting it's a cage fight with the laws of physics. The truth is, it's only carbon-based fuels that can provide enough energy to power the world's insatiable demand for energy. And that presents you and me with one of the greatest single opportunities I've ever come across in my 25-year career. Over the last several years, as climate alarmism has grown to a fever pitch, fossil fuel production has fallen drastically. That's because of the drop in capital spending across the industry, which remains 30% below pre-COVID levels, despite far higher energy prices. This decline in fossil fuel production, especially here in America, is already having serious economic consequences. And the longer it lasts, the worse it will get. As Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, bluntly put it to squad member Rashida Tlaib, stopping fossil fuel production would be the road to hell for America. And in order to avert a full-scale energy crisis, both here and abroad, America needs to produce and export a lot more natural gas, roughly 50% more, which is around 50 billion cubic feet per day more. Fortunately, those rates of production are possible, and fortunately, we have enough reserves to last 50 years or more. Our energy complex can be mobilized to dramatically increase production and help reduce the prices and provide energy security for our allies. Construction can begin on vast new natural gas export capabilities, and we can ship gas across the Atlantic and power the electric grids from London to Istanbul. Along the way, investors in natural gas production and infrastructure will make a fortune, which is part of the reason why I've written this report. There's only one catch. None of these things are going to happen until the Biden administration changes its tune and realizes that radicals like Larry Fink and Michael Bloomberg are destroying America's economy. And with millions of Americans already suffering from historic inflation, rising interest rates, plunging stocks, and a recession, Biden and the Democrats' only hope of maintaining power is to change course on fossil fuel investment and infrastructure. Producing more fossil fuel energy is the only way to provide for a growing economy, an increasing standard of living, and an increasing population. They can't use coal or gasoline, though, because the progressives, led by people like Fink and Bloomberg, have spent decades decrying them. The only solution? America's vast natural gas resources. Over the next 6 to 12 months, it will become clear that the best, the safest, and the cleanest way to grow the world's economy is by using more of America's natural gas. These changes are inevitable. Why? Because there's no other way to ensure the reliability and the affordability of electricity around the world. And right now, only a handful of companies are holding the right cards. That means the number one way to protect yourself from stakeholder capitalism, America's descent into socialism, and this recession is to invest in the most important and best positioned U.S. oil and gas companies. I'm not the only one who has seen the writing on the wall either. The world's best investor, Warren Buffett, has been making huge investments in oil and gas like never before. His firm, Berkshire Hathaway, has increased its stake in Occidental Petroleum to 27%. This is only the beginning, though, as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has granted Buffett approval to buy up to 50% of the available stock. And many analysts believe he will eventually make a bid to purchase the entire company. In fact, Buffett's oil and gas investments this year are among the biggest bets he's ever made. Just how big? Well, Buffett's total cost basis for Coca-Cola was $1.3 billion. And he started buying Apple in 2016 and bought $6.7 billion that year. Coca-Cola and Apple are right at the top of his signature stock picks and best performers. His energy investments for the past year? Over $29 billion. When history's most successful investor makes his biggest stock bet over a 12-month period, you know it's time to act. You see, Warren knows the supply and demand characteristics in U.S. oil and natural gas haven't been this favorable since the 1970s. That's why I recently hired 2 full-time energy analysts and moved them to Maryland from Texas and Florida. Together, our focus has been on understanding how the biggest natural gas resources in America are most likely to be developed and how they will eventually be sold and delivered into the world market. We have found an incredible story about 3 brothers who have built the largest natural gas producer in America from scratch over the last decade. They are transitioning their company right now to become an export-focused global liquid natural gas giant. Over the next decade, I predict investors and this company could potentially make 10 times their money. It's the biggest disruption in the world's energy markets in 100 years. And you've never heard anything about it. This is the story of 3 brothers who became America's largest producers of natural gas, and how what they're doing next will make billions and transform the global market for energy. For the last 50 years, the quest for energy security has dominated foreign policy of all the great powers, including the United States. Thus, Saudi Arabia has always been given a pass, no matter what happened. Even the country's ties to the 9/11 terrorists were swept under the rug. But the world's market for energy is about to be turned upside down forever. And in another decade, no one will need Saudi oil anymore. Before the end of this year, the first international end-to-end production and distribution deal for American shale gas will be struck by a leading fracker, a small, independent oil and gas firm whose production is centered on the largest natural gas reserve in the world, the Marcellus Shale. This Pittsburgh company, launched just over a decade ago, will soon become the first super major energy company to emerge from America's shale resources. This firm, which I'd bet you've never heard of, has suddenly, virtually overnight, become the largest producer of U.S. natural gas. It'll soon be the world's biggest and most important energy company. Let me say that again. A little Pittsburgh company will soon be one of the most powerful energy companies in the whole world. While that may seem hard to believe, it's the simple facts of the matter. And if you take one thing from this presentation, remember these words. This company sits on a resource that's so big and is growing production so much, it will soon become the world's most important energy company. The company's growth over the last 3 years has been explosive. After a long period of exploration and drilling, it has been able to ramp production and dramatically increase its margins through scale. It has also made a number of brilliant bolt-on acquisitions, gaining additional reserves and pipelines. Here are the numbers. In 2019, the company was producing $250 million in free cash flow. That's profits that can be distributed to owners. Then in 2020, the company virtually doubled to $495 million in cash flow. In 2021, free cash flow grew 22% to $607 million. But the real growth is still coming. In the first half of 2022, the company returned $1.3 billion in capital to investors, and it raised its free cash flow estimate for the full year by 50% to $2.35 billion. And all of that was before its most recent deal. In early September, the gods of gas announced another incredible deal to acquire about 15% more production, 11 years worth of additional reserves, and miles of valuable pipelines. The company didn't add any debt, buying the assets for cash on hand and some stock. On the heels of this latest deal, the company projected its share buyback for the year would double. We expect the company to produce more free cash flow over the next 4 years, $5 billion a year, than the value of the entire company today. How's that possible? How did these brothers from Pittsburgh take a small, regional, also-ran shale gas company and turn it into an economic engine that produces tens of billions of free cash flow and is the largest producer of natural gas in the United States. The brothers didn't merely cut costs. They also struck a deal with an oil major, a huge deal. In the fall of 2020, the pandemic sent oil and gas prices to decade lows. The oil major wrote off its entire Marcellus investment. In fact, it took an $8 billion write-off. So the gods of gas paid only $735 million for the oil major's entire Marcellus operation. They stole it. The deal, worth 800,000 acres, assures the brothers' publicly traded company will remain the dominant provider of Marcellus natural gas for decades. If the world wants to have reliable electricity without burning coal, natural gas is the only proven energy source that's reliable enough and affordable. There is no other real-world solution. Don't tell the snowflakes. How much gas could the gods of gas eventually produce? The company currently claims 23 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in proven reserves. But the truth is, no one really knows for sure how much more natural gas will be recovered because as drilling technology improves, the amount of gas that's recoverable continues to grow a lot. Scientists from Penn State University now claim up to 400 trillion cubic feet of gas is recoverable in the Marcellus Basin. However, these same estimates have been increasing over time, from 2 trillion 20 years ago to 84 trillion 10 years ago to 97 trillion most recently. These increases aren't related to how much natural gas is in the rocks, but instead, the growth comes from technology's ability to extract it profitably. And in that regard, this company has always been a market leader. The company's proven reserves have doubled since 2016. And it owns over 1 million acres in the Marcellus. It's a safe bet that the company's reserves will continue to grow for decades. To put this into context, the Marcellus probably contains more natural gas than all of the other natural gas producing areas in the United States combined, and probably more natural gas than every other producing nation except Russia, Iran, and Qatar. The Marcellus isn't merely a big gas field. It's one of the largest reserves of energy in the world. And this company is the best operator with the most production and the biggest reserves. Its development will not only change the United States' economy, it will also reshape the global energy map for the rest of our lives. No one will produce more natural gas from the Marcellus or in America for the next 30 years at least. What does this mean for you in dollars and cents? A company like this one that's producing reliable free cash flows of $5 billion annually with a proven growth strategy should be worth at least $100 billion, or 4 times more than the stock's current price. But that projection is extremely conservative. It is based on an average price of gas below $4 per MCF, despite current prices over $8 per MCF. It's also based on the company not doing any more attractive acquisitions, which it almost certainly will do. And there's the possibility of vastly more profits if, as the company has said it will, it invests in building its own LNG facilities and pipelines to reach the global markets for natural gas, where prices are typically well above $10 per MCF. That's why I wouldn't be surprised to see the gods of gas earn returns of 10 times investors' money over the next 10 years. This is a great investment, as good as an investment as I have ever found in my 25-year career. And it's why I want to give you access to my latest investors briefing that covers this story and opportunity in exacting detail. It's called The Gods of Gas, and I'll tell you how to get your hands on it in just a moment. First, though, I want to tell you about another opportunity that's been unleashed by the energy crisis wrought by stakeholder capitalism and ESG. It has even more upside than the gods of gas because it's only beginning to assemble its acreage and build its pipelines and LNG facilities. The best part is the founder. He's the man who started the entire LNG boom in the United States, building the first independent, non-major oil company LNG export facility between 2010 and 2014. It's a stock that has gone from around $5 to over $150 a share, a return of almost 3,000%. Now, he's about to do it again. Currently in the U.S., there are only 8 LNG export terminals. The newest is Venture Global's Calcasieu Pass in Louisiana, and it is privately owned. There are, however, 2 other new LNG plants that are approved and currently under construction, and these are both publicly traded. One belongs to a partnership between a super major oil company, ExxonMobil, and Qatar. Called Golden Pass, it's located along the Gulf Coast at Sabine Pass, Texas. You can, of course, invest in ExxonMobil, but it's such a huge company that even if it makes a lot of extra money with this new LNG facility, it probably won't move the needle for Exxon's share price. But the other new, fully permitted LNG facility that's being built is owned by a small company whose founder, as I mentioned, has experience building greenfield LNG facilities. This new company, known as Driftwood in energy circles, has a unique business model that's designed solely to serve international markets for energy. Its plan is to acquire natural gas wells in the Haynesville Shale, that's in Louisiana, and transport that production via pipeline to a new LNG plant it's building on the Gulf Coast. The Driftwood pipeline and LNG plant is a $12 billion piece of energy infrastructure that has the potential to become one of the most valuable energy infrastructure facilities in the world. It's going to be financed in part from its own natural gas production. And most likely, the project will be purchased even before it's completed by a super major like Shell, which has spent 50 years developing LNG assets all around the world. Such a deal could lead to huge profits for investors in a very short amount of time. Of course, this kind of an investment isn't like buying the gods of gas. This is still a very small company. Its share price is going to be very volatile. Moves up or down of 50% or more won't be unusual as prices for natural gas change, as prices for LNG change, and as financing options for the Driftwood facility materialize. The next big move for the stock will come when it announces major funding for the next phase of the project. Once that happens, I wouldn't be surprised to see the market cap move above $10 billion, or about 5 times its current share price. An announcement like that could come at any time. So I hope you'll talk with your investment advisor and acquire a stake that's appropriate for your portfolio. When you do, you should mention these 3 things that I really like about this deal that most investors just don't know. First, the 3 largest institutional investors in the company are the 3 leading ESG money management firms, Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. That tells us it's likely this company will be considered a clean energy company that's embraced by environmentalists because of the amount of coal-fired power plants its natural gas exports will take offline. Second, one of the other major shareholders is Paulson & Company. That's a hedge fund that I respect tremendously. John Paulson is one of the best investors of the last 30 years, and I have followed his investing for much of that time. He's been buying shares since this company started construction. Finally, the thing that gives me the most confidence is this group's ability to get deals financed. Because as I mentioned, the ownership group is led by the founder of a company I have followed closely and recommended at different times over the last 10 years. This company's founder knows the LNG export business better than anyone in the world. As I detail inside the next LNG giant, I believe this company will be worth at least $100 billion in 10 years. That's 50 times what it is worth right now. And you can get in right now before this company becomes the next juggernaut of the global energy market. To get access to both of these urgent opportunities, the gods of gas and the next LNG giant, all you have to do is sign up for a trial of my new research service. As I mentioned earlier, over 2 decades ago, I started a small financial research firm from my kitchen table. The company grew to become America's largest, most successful independent financial research firm with millions of readers all around the world. And during that time, I'm proud to say we helped countless people from all walks of life grow their wealth exponentially. However, in December 2020, I retired to allow my firm to continue growing as a public company, now called MarketWise. My old firm is now led by a phalanx of lawyers, and it went public in July of 2021 in a $3 billion NASDAQ IPO. Of course, I'm proud of the business that I built, and I continue to be among the largest individual shareholders of that firm. Nevertheless, I prefer the independence of running my own small shop. That's why the headquarters of my new company, Porter & Company, is in my tractor barn. I get to work with a small group of friends, some of whom I've known since high school. And nobody gets to tell me what I can and can't write. I don't have to meet any demands for growth. We have 0 meetings. We just work together, literally all sitting next to each other in the hayloft to research and publish major investment ideas. We are searching for big themes that will last a decade or longer. We want to identify ideas that we believe are way ahead of the market and that our readers will not find anywhere else. I own 100% of Porter & Company, and with a little help from you, it will always remain that way. At this point in my career, my independence and the ability I have to serve you, and only you, is the most valuable trait I have to offer. I cherish that freedom, and I believe it will create a much better outcome for you too. The Gods of Gas and the Next LNG Giant stories I just told you about are quintessential Porter stories. They are the kind of major investment themes I have focused on my entire career, and as my track record proves, can make early investors a fortune. Right now, I think what's happening in American energy is one of the most important economic trends in the world. My point is by following these major themes that evolve over several years that investors have the best chance to make market-beating returns. I'm not interested, personally, in merely finding a single small stock that's going to go up a little next week. I want to find companies that I can invest in for years and years that can generate real and lasting wealth. The kind of wealth that I can depend on, that I can plan on, and that can sustain my family for decades, no matter what happens to the overall economy. If that's what you're looking for too, then I invite you to become a founding member of The Big Secret on Wall Street. This is Porter & Company's flagship financial advisory service, personally written by me and 2 of the best analysts I've ever worked with. As a founding member, you'll get instant access to the 2 special briefings I've told you about today, The Gods of Gas and the Next LNG Giant. That's just the tip of the iceberg though, because every other week on Friday afternoon, The Big Secret on Wall Street will reveal the most important, yet often hidden or overlooked opportunities in the markets. That's 24 new issues per year, each of which will explore a new investment opportunity or trend in exacting, exhaustive detail. I'm talking about research reports and investment ideas you simply can't get anywhere else at any price. In fact, outside of specialty research teams inside hedge funds and banks and private equity firms, there's no one producing research like we do. In addition to your research report every other week, you will also have access to our entire backlog of research reports. Each issue has an investment idea I'm willing to bet you've never seen anywhere else, including the Goldman Sachs of white trash, the secret behind T. Boone's fortune, grab a bucket, it's about to rain gold, the end of America, and many more. Each recommendation will be logged and tracked in our model portfolio. You'll also receive timely updates and alerts on each position. And here's our most exclusive benefit to charter members. Every year, I'm going to host a private members-only conference at my farm in Baltimore County. At this event, you'll not only meet me, you'll also connect with a selection of hand-picked experts who will be giving private presentations. Food, drink, and entertainment will also, of course, be provided. And if you can't attend in person, don't worry. You'll get a digital access pass so you can attend from anywhere in the world. Plus, you'll get recordings of the entire event so you can watch the speakers and presentations in your own time. If I were to charge for a conference like this, it would cost at least $5,000 to attend, or maybe $25,000. But it's free to you as a founding member. All of this and more is waiting for you inside The Big Secret on Wall Street. And right now, I'm giving you a 30% discount. Typically, membership to The Big Secret will be $1,425 per year. But as a special offer to new members, you can join today for only $1,000. That's a savings of more than $400. And it works out to a paltry $41 per issue, which is a steal, given that each of our recommendations could potentially deliver tenfold returns. Not to mention the bonuses you're getting as a founding member, which are easily valued at $5,000 a year. To claim your membership, simply click the button below this video. You'll be taken to an encrypted web page where you can enter your details and secure your spot as a founding member. Plus, on that page, you'll find there's another bonus waiting for you. It's titled Energy Royalties. It reveals a unique energy investment opportunity that is safe from the volatile nature of the energy sector. You see, unlike other energy firms, this company doesn't have any operating or capital expenses. It simply owns the mineral rights on the oil fields. All capital and operating expenses lie with the operator, which means a capital-intensive business has been transformed into a very capital-efficient business that's virtually guaranteed to produce increasing returns across time. And in today's volatile market, it's one of the best plays you can make. You see, the cash flow statements for most commodity producers plunge deep into negative territory during commodity bear markets because the prices of the things they sell go down while operating costs and capital expenditures remain stubbornly high. But this business model is different. It's designed to be immune from this defect. The following chart shows how this royalty company sailed through the 2020 energy collapse with barely a blip in its cash flows. In other words, this royalty company provides all the upside from higher energy prices, with only a fraction of the downside compared to traditional oil explorers and producers. And without needing to recycle earnings back into expensive equipment and other operating costs, the cash flows go right back to you, the investor. That's how the company pays out a current distribution of over $3 a year, or a yield of almost 11%. And when you join the Big Secret today, I'll send you a bonus briefing on this energy royalty firm for free. All you've got to do is click the button below this video right now. And look, I don't expect you to just take my word for everything we've covered today, which is why I want to let you test drive our research and see everything for yourself before you make a final decision. Click the button below now, secure your spot, and then take a full 30 days to check out our work with absolutely no obligation. If at any point you decide the Big Secret isn't for you, just drop my team an email and we'll promptly issue you a full refund. To take advantage of this special founding member offer, please click on the button now below the video. Or if you prefer, you can call my office and speak to my team directly. All the details are listed on the next page, so go ahead, click the link below now while this offer is still available. And remember, when you become a founding member today, you'll lock in your discount plus the bonus gifts. But the offer expires soon, so please don't miss it. Click the button now and secure your spot.